In the spring of 1977, the purchasing manager of a mid-sized insurance company in Chicago walked into an office equipment showroom on North Michigan Avenue and bought a Savin 750 copier for $3,200. The Xerox machine it replaced had cost his company $6,400 in annual lease payments the year before. He cut his copying costs in half. He signed the paperwork in 20 minutes. He went back to work. He did not know the machine was built in Japan. He did not know the company whose name was on the front panel had never manufactured a single copier in the United States. He knew one thing: it worked. It worked every morning. It worked at 4 o'clock on a Friday. It worked when his secretary ran 400 copies of an actuarial summary for the quarterly review. And it worked when the field adjusters needed claim forms on the same afternoon. The name on the machine said Savin. That was enough. A decade later, that name was on 450 independent dealerships across the United States. Savin had outsold Xerox in the American small to medium business segment for the better part of 15 years. The company had built one of the most effective dealer networks in the history of American office equipment, loyal, territorial, and formidable. But the real story of Savin is not the copier that beat Xerox. It is the story of what happens when an American brand's entire foundation is a product it does not own, a machine it did not build, and a partnership it could not control. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories of the American companies that built the machines the office ran on, and what the market did to them. Like this video and subscribe if that history matters to you. This story begins not in a factory, but in a sales agreement, in New York City in 1959. Savin Business Machines Corporation was founded in New York City in 1959. It was not founded by an engineer. It was not founded by an inventor. It was founded by businessmen who understood one thing about the American office equipment market that most of their competitors had missed entirely. The machine was not the product. The distribution was. The American copier market in 1959 was, for practical purposes, a single company market. Xerox had introduced its Model 914 plain paper copier that same year, the first office copier that required no special paper, no chemical treatment, and no trained operator. The 914 used xerography, an electrostatic process in which a charged drum attracts dry toner powder to represent the image, then transfers and fuses it onto ordinary paper. The machine weighed 648 pounds. It required a dedicated 20-ampere electrical circuit, and it cost, in lease terms, the equivalent of what a mid-level corporate secretary earned in a full year. No one else had anything like it. American offices that could afford the Xerox lease signed. Offices that could not afford it continued using mimeograph stencils, carbon paper, and spirit duplicators. The hectograph process, a system in which a die-coated master sheet transferred copies through direct chemical contact with treated paper, producing that faintly purple text that every American who attended school in the 1960s can still picture on a test handed back by a teacher on a Tuesday morning. Savin's founders looked at that market, dominated above by a Xerox the small business could not afford, dominated below by duplicating technology that was cheap but limited, and they saw a gap, a profitable, enormous, underserved gap. The solution came from Japan. Ricoh company Limited Dollars, established in Tokyo in 1936, had developed a liquid toner copying process, a system in which toner was suspended in a liquid carrier fluid rather than applied as a dry powder. Liquid toner, the suspension of pigment particles in a solvent that transferred the image to paper through a wet contact process, required simpler internal mechanisms than Xerox's dry system, produced comparable copy quality at lower machine cost, and could be manufactured at a price point that made the Xerox lease look unreasonable by comparison. Ricoh needed an American distribution partner. Savin needed a machine. The agreement they reached gave Savin exclusive distribution rights to Ricoh copiers in the United States market under the Savin brand name. Ricoh built the machines in Japan. Savin sold them in America. The nameplate said Savin. The engineering said Ricoh. The business logic for both parties was impeccable. Savin's first significant product in the American market was the Savin 750, introduced in the early 1970s. Its American list price was $3,200, the rough equivalent of $23,000 in today's money, and approximately half the annual cost of leasing a comparable Xerox machine. For a law firm with 12 attorneys, a regional insurance agency, a municipal government office, or a community hospital's billing department, the arithmetic was not complicated. The Xerox salesman offered a lease with a service contract and a per-copy charge. The Savin dealer offered ownership, a lower per-copy cost, and a service technician who would be on-site within 24 hours. Savin employed no factory workers. It owned no manufacturing equipment. What it owned was a contract, a brand, and the conviction that in American office equipment, the relationship between a dealer and a customer was worth more than the mechanism inside the machine. That conviction would build an empire. It would also define exactly how the empire would end. The Savin 750 arrived in American office equipment showrooms at a moment of genuine frustration. Corporate America had accepted the Xerox lease as the cost of doing business. Small business America had not. The independent insurance agent, the regional accounting firm, the municipal clerk's office running on a county budget. These were buyers who needed volume copying at a price that did not require a capital equipment justification to a board of directors. The Savin 750 was built for exactly that buyer. The machine itself was compact by the standards of the era. Where the Xerox 914 required its own corner of the office and a dedicated circuit, the Savin 750 sat on a standard office table, drew standard current, and weighed under 200 pounds. Its liquid toner system, the wet process mechanism in which toner particles suspended in a petroleum-based carrier fluid were drawn electrostatically to the charged image drum, then transferred directly onto plain paper and dried by a low-heat fuser, produced copies with a slightly glossier finish than Xerox's dry toner output. And it did so at a per-copy cost that Savin dealers could demonstrate on a notepad in the customer's own conference room. The math was not abstract. It was visible. It was immediate. And it was devastating to the Xerox proposal sitting on the desk beside it. At $3,200 list price in 1973, approximately $22,000 in today's dollars, the Savin 750 cost less than 6 months of Xerox lease payments for a comparable machine in a comparable office. The closest domestic competitor at that price point was the IBM Copier Warren, introduced in 1970 at $5,500, which used a coated paper transfer process, a system requiring specially treated paper stock sold exclusively through IBM's own supply channel, rather than plain paper. IBM's machine produced clean output but locked the buyer into IBM's consumable pricing for every copy made. Savin used plain paper and standard carrier fluid refills available through any Savin dealer. The total cost of ownership over a 3-year period for a small business running 2,000 copies per month favored the Savin by a margin that required no persuasion to explain. The distribution breakthrough that unlocked the American market was not a government contract or a corporate standardization. It was a decision about channel architecture. Savin's management structured its American dealer network on the principle of exclusive geographic territories. Each independent dealer owned the Savin relationship in a defined market area, received protected pricing, and carried a service commitment backed by Savin's national parts supply chain. A dealer in Columbus, Ohio did not compete with a dealer in Cincinnati. A dealer in suburban Dallas did not undercut the dealer in Fort Worth. The territory was the asset. The relationship was the product. By 1975, Savin had authorized dealers in every major American metropolitan market and most secondary markets. The dealers were former office equipment technicians, former Xerox sales representatives who had grown tired of the lease structure, former business machine shop owners who recognized a price-competitive product when they encountered one. They were not corporate employees. They were independent business people whose entire professional identity was staked on the Savin name, and who understood their local market in ways that no national direct sales force ever could. The American moat Savin built was not technological. Ricoh held the technology. The moat was relational. A Savin dealer in Memphis, Tennessee, who had serviced the copy machines of every law firm on Court Square for 8 years was not replaceable by a Xerox regional account manager who rotated territories every 24 months. The dealer knew which firm's office manager preferred service calls before 9 in the morning. He knew which paralegal ran the heaviest copy volume on Thursday afternoons before Friday filings. He knew where the paper jams happened and why, and he had already ordered the replacement feed roller before the customer called. That knowledge, accumulated, local, specific, and entirely human, was the Savin competitive advantage. The name on the machine was American. The relationship behind it was irreplaceable. For a decade and a half, that combination was enough to take market share from the most powerful copier company in the world. By the late 1970s, Savin was not a challenger brand. It was an institution. In the American small to medium business market, the segment that Xerox's lease structure had systematically underserved for 15 years. Savin had achieved the kind of market penetration that corporate purchasing managers recognize not as preference, but as default. When a regional accounting firm in Des Moines needed a second copier, the call went to the Savin dealer. When a county courthouse in rural Georgia needed to replace an aging duplicator, the purchasing officer pulled the Savin catalog. When a community hospital in Albuquerque needed to standardize its patient records copying across 3 departments, the facilities manager called the dealer who had serviced the machine in the billing office for 6 years without a single missed appointment. The institutions that adopted Savin in this period were not glamorous. They were the load-bearing walls of American administrative life. Municipal governments across the Midwest standardized on Savin machines for their permit offices. their tax assessment departments, their public works filing rooms. Regional law firms from Atlanta to Seattle equipped their document rooms with Savin 770 and 8880 series machines, the successors to the 750, introduced through the mid-1970s with higher monthly duty cycles and faster copy speeds. Independent insurance agencies, the thousands of family-owned firms that underwrote American homeowner and automobile policies from storefronts on main streets in every state, ran their policy document copying through Savin machines serviced by dealers who often lived in the same towns they served. The United States Postal Service evaluated Savin equipment for regional administrative facilities in 1976. Community college districts in California, Texas, and Ohio, institutions with academic copying needs that dwarfed most private offices but whose budgets could not support Xerox's enterprise pricing, standardized on Savin through statewide purchasing agreements negotiated directly with regional dealers. The American Bar Association's member survey of office equipment preferences, conducted in 1978, identified Savin as the leading copier brand among solo practitioners and firms of fewer than 20 attorneys, the largest single segment of American legal practice. At its peak, Savin's American dealer network comprised more than 450 independent dealerships, employing an estimated 8,000 Americans in sales, service, and administrative roles across all 50 states. Annual revenues reached an estimated $400 million by the early 1980s, a figure that placed Savin among the top 5 copier brands in American market share by unit volume, behind Xerox and IBM but ahead of every other competitor in the small to medium business segment. The Savin 880, introduced in 1977 at a list price of $4,100, approximately $20,000 in today's dollars, became the company's highest volume model, copied in the offices of American small businesses at a rate that industry estimates placed at over 1 billion copies per year across the installed base by 1980. The stakes sentence belongs here in this period in an office that most Americans never thought about but every American depended on. In the claims processing centers of regional Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliates across the American South and Midwest, the offices that processed the medical insurance claims of millions of working American families. Savin copiers ran the document workflow that moved a claim from intake to adjudication. A hospital bill arrived by mail. A clerk copied it for the file. A second copy went to the reviewing examiner. A third copy went to the member record. 3 copies, every claim, hundreds of claims per day, in offices from Birmingham to Baton Rouge to Bowling Green. The machine that made those copies was not glamorous. It was not innovative. It was simply there, every morning, every afternoon, working. The name on the front panel said Savin. The families whose claims were processed on time did not know that. They did not need to. There is a sensory memory specific to the Savin machine that anyone who worked in a small American office in the 1970s or early 1980s will recognize without prompting. It is not the sound of the mechanism, though the Savin 750 and 770 made a distinctive low hum during the warm-up cycle, a sustained electrical tone that signaled the liquid toner system reaching operating temperature. It is the smell. Liquid toner copiers, wet process machines in which petroleum-based carrier fluid suspended the image pigment through each copy cycle, produced a faint chemical scent that was different in character from the dry warmth of a Xerox machine. Not unpleasant, not sharp, a background presence, the way a copy room always had a presence, paper dust and toner and the faint heat of the fuser, but with an undertone specific to the wet process, a scent that clung to the output paper for the first few minutes after copying. Office workers who ran Savin machines daily stopped noticing it. Visitors to the copy room always did. The paper itself felt different. Liquid toner output had a slightly glazed surface on the copy face, not glossy in the way a photograph is glossy, but smoother than the flat matte finish of a Xerox dry toner copy. When a paralegal pulled 50 copies of a legal brief from a Savin 880 on a Thursday afternoon, the stack had a specific hand, slightly cool, faintly slick on the printed side, with a rigidity that dry toner copies at the same paper weight did not quite match. Trained office workers could identify a Savin copy by touch. Some preferred it. The image density was consistent. The margins held. The machine did not streak on the 200th copy the way an insufficiently maintained dry toner machine would. The dealer relationship was itself a kind of sensory constant. The Savin technician arrived in a service vehicle, usually a van, marked with the dealership name and the Savin logo, carrying a parts kit specific to the installed model. He knew the machine by serial number before he walked through the door. He had the service history on a card in his clipboard. He did not need to be shown where the copy room was. He had been there before. He would be there again. The handshake at the end of the call was not a formality. It was the renewal of a professional relationship that, in many American offices, lasted longer than the tenure of the office manager who had originally signed the service contract. That relationship, accumulated over years, renewed quarterly through service visits, deepened through consumable deliveries and operator training sessions, and the occasional loaner machine when a major repair ran past a business day, was Savin's true product, not the copier, not the liquid toner system, not the Ricoh engineering underneath the American nameplate, the relationship. And it was precisely that relationship, its depth, its locality, its irreplaceability, that made what was coming so difficult to see. Because the threat to Savin did not arrive as a competitor with a better machine at a lower price. It arrived as a technology that changed the meaning of the word copier entirely. And it arrived, as these things always do in American office equipment history, faster than anyone who depended on the old system was prepared to accept. In 1984, Hewlett-Packard introduced the LaserJet printer at a list price of $3,195. The LaserJet used a laser beam to draw the image on a charged drum, the same electrostatic principle as xerography, but driven by digital input rather than optical scanning of a physical document. It produced output at 300 dots per inch. It was silent by the standards of any impact mechanism. It connected directly to the IBM PC that was, by 1984, already present in the administrative offices of every American company large enough to have a purchasing department. The LaserJet did not replace the copier immediately, but it announced, clearly and without ambiguity, that the future of document reproduction in the American office was digital, driven by software, connected to computers, and defined by a cost-per-page economics that no analog liquid toner system could match at volume. Savin's dealers understood machines. They understood service contracts. They understood the handshake at the end of a call. Not one of them had been trained to sell a conversation about document management software. Not one of them had a product answer to a laser printer that sat on a desktop and cost the same as the copier in the copy room. The empire was intact. The foundation had shifted. And in the offices of Ricoh's Tokyo headquarters, a strategic conversation was already underway that Savin's American dealers would not learn about until it was too late to matter. The first warning arrived not as a crisis, but as an arithmetic problem that Savin's management could not solve cleanly. In 1979, Xerox, the company Savin had been systematically undercutting for a decade, responded. The response was not a price cut. It was a product line. Xerox introduced the 3100 series of low-volume copiers, priced to compete directly with Savin and the other liquid toner challengers that had eroded its small business market through the 1970s. For the first time, a Xerox machine sat in the same showroom price tier as a Savin machine. For the first time, the Xerox salesman could answer the Savin dealer's cost per copy argument with a number that was not embarrassing. Savin's response was to do what it had always done: go back to Ricoh and ask for a better machine. Ricoh delivered. The Savin 880 and the subsequent 9000 series maintained competitive pricing through the early 1980s, and the dealer network held. But the competitive dynamic had shifted in a way that price alone could not address. Xerox was not just matching Savin on price. It was matching Savin on service infrastructure, building out its own network of smaller independent dealers and authorized service centers in the secondary markets where Savin had operated without meaningful competition for years. The moat was narrowing. The Savin dealer, who had been the only authorized copier service provider in his county, was, by 1982, no longer the only one. Then came Canon. In 1982, Canon USA introduced the NP200 plain paper copier to the American market at a list price of $2,995. The NP200 used dry toner, the same electrostatic process as Xerox, refined and miniaturized, and it produced copy quality that matched or exceeded the Savin liquid toner output at a per-copy cost that was structurally lower. Canon had no legacy liquid toner infrastructure to defend. Canon had no dealer network built on a 20-year-old distribution agreement. Canon had a machine that was objectively better than what Savin was selling, at a price that was lower, backed by a Japanese manufacturer that was not sharing its American revenues with an American distribution partner. The model that had made Savin possible, a Japanese manufacturer needing an American face, an American distributor needing a Japanese machine, was no longer the only model available. By 1983, Ricoh itself was selling copiers in the American market under the Ricoh name through its own direct sales channel, alongside the machines it continued to supply to Savin. The arrangement that had been exclusive in spirit, if not always in contract, was becoming quietly and without formal announcement, something less than exclusive in practice. Savin's management recognized the competitive pressure. The pivot they attempted was product diversification. moving the dealer network into facsimile machines, adding laser printers to the product catalog, positioning Savin dealerships as full-service office technology providers rather than copier specialists. The strategy was reasonable. The execution was constrained by a fundamental structural problem. Every product Savin added to its catalog came from Ricoh. Every product Ricoh supplied to Savin, Ricoh also supplied to its own direct sales organization. Savin was attempting to diversify using inventory that its primary competitor, the manufacturer it depended on entirely, controlled completely. The dealer network began to fracture at the edges first. Dealerships in smaller markets, where copy volume had never been high enough to sustain a dedicated service operation, began closing or converting to multi-brand dealerships, selling Savin alongside Minolta, Konica, and the emerging Canon line. A multi-brand dealer is not a Savin dealer. A dealer who sells 4 brands has divided loyalty, divided inventory, divided service training, and a purchasing decision made fresh at every sales call based on which manufacturer is offering the best margin that quarter. The territorial exclusivity that had been Savin's competitive foundation became, in a multi-brand dealer's showroom, simply one option among several. Peak employment in the Savin dealer network, the 8,000 Americans in sales, service, and support across 450 dealerships, began declining after 1983. Not catastrophically, not with announcements or plant closings or Chapter 11 filings that made the business press. Quietly. A dealership in Tulsa closed when the owner retired and no buyer appeared. A dealership in Providence converted to a Minolta primary line and kept Savin as a secondary. A dealership in Fresno lost its largest account, a regional hospital network, to a Xerox direct sales contract that included document management software the Savin dealer had no equivalent to offer. The copy room was changing, not the machine in it, the conversation around it. In 1988, Ricoh made a decision that required no public announcement and generated no headlines in the American business press. It restructured its American distribution strategy to prioritize direct sales through Ricoh-branded channels over the Savin dealer network that had carried its machines for nearly 3 decades. The decision was not punitive. It was arithmetic. Ricoh's own American sales organization had matured. It no longer needed an American intermediary to explain its machines to American buyers. The Savin arrangement had served its purpose. The purpose was complete. Savin's revenues began declining in measurable increments. The product line narrowed. New Ricoh models reached the Savin catalog later than they reached Ricoh's own dealers, sometimes by 6 months, sometimes by a year. A Savin dealer presenting a new model to a hospital purchasing committee in 1989 was sometimes presenting a machine that the Ricoh direct sales representative had been selling for 8 months. The price advantage that had defined Savin since 1973 was gone. The product freshness that a dealer network requires to sustain customer confidence was eroding. What remained was the name, the service history, and the relationships. Durable assets, but not indefinitely durable against a competitor with newer machines, lower prices, and the manufacturing infrastructure to back both. The laser printer completed what Canon had started. By 1990, the Hewlett-Packard LaserJet 2, introduced in 1987 at $2,195, approximately $7,000 in today's dollars, was present in the administrative offices of virtually every American company that owned an IBM PC or compatible. Document reproduction in the American office was bifurcating. High-volume centralized copying through large floor-standing machines, and low to medium volume distributed printing through desktop laser printers connected directly to personal computers. The copy room was not disappearing, but its role was contracting, and the segment it was contracting from, the low to medium volume small business market, was precisely the segment Savin had built its empire on. The numbers told the story without editorializing. Savin's dealer network, which had peaked above 450 locations, fell below 300 by 1991. Annual revenues estimated at $400 million at peak, contracted by roughly a third in 5 years. The Savin 9000 series, the company's last genuinely competitive liquid toner product line, was discontinued without a direct successor. Replacement models came from Ricoh's dry toner catalog, mechanically identical to machines Ricoh sold under its own name at prices the Savin distribution margin made difficult to match. In 1995, Ricoh Corporation completed the acquisition of Savin Business Machines. The transaction was not a rescue, it was a consolidation. Ricoh absorbed the remaining Savin dealer relationships into its own distribution structure. Dealers who had built careers on the Savin name were offered Ricoh dealer agreements. Some accepted, many did not. The ones who did not accept had spent 20 years selling a brand, not a machine. Without the brand, there was nothing to sell. The independent Savin dealer was finished. The copy room went quiet. The service van stopped coming. The handshake at the end of the call, the one that had renewed a professional relationship quarterly for 2 decades in offices from Portland to Pittsburgh, did not happen again. The Savin name survived the acquisition as a brand applied to Ricoh machines sold through Ricoh's dealer channel, a ghost label maintained for the residual customer loyalty it might extract from buyers who remembered the original. Ricoh continued using the Savin name alongside its Lanier brand in the American market, sustaining 2 parallel dealer channels selling functionally identical machines at marginally differentiated price points. The strategy generated margin. It did not generate identity. By 2010, a Savin dealer was a Ricoh dealer who sold Savin-branded Ricoh machines. By 2015, the distinction had ceased to matter to anyone except the dealers themselves, and there were fewer of them every year. In 2016, Ricoh announced the retirement of the Savin brand in the United States market. The announcement occupied 4 sentences in a trade press release. It generated no obituaries. It closed no factories. It put no one out of work who had not already found other work. It simply ended. The name that had outsold Xerox in the American small business market for 15 years. The brand that 450 independent dealers had staked their professional identities on. The machine that had run the copy rooms of municipal governments and law firms and insurance agencies and community hospitals across every state in the Union. Gone quietly without ceremony. That is how American office empires end, more often than not. Not with a bankruptcy filing on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Not with a factory closing and workers carrying boxes through a parking lot. With a 4-sentence trade press release. With a brand retirement. With a dealer who calls his best customer to say the name is changing, the machine is the same, and everything will be fine. Everything was not fine, it was simply over. The machines are still out there, not many, not in offices, but in the places where American office equipment goes when the office no longer needs it. The estate sale on a Saturday morning in a suburb of Cleveland, the Craigslist listing from a retired accountant in Tucson who is clearing out his garage, the back room of a thrift store in a strip mall outside Columbus where a Savin 750 sits on a pallet beside a filing cabinet and a broken desk lamp priced at $40. With a handwritten note taped to the paper tray that says, "Works, needs fluid." The collector community for Savin machines is modest compared to the typewriter revival networks, the antique typewriter collectors groups on Facebook, the Typewriter DB registry at Typewriter DB, net that catalogs surviving machines by serial number and model, the virtual typewriter museum at Typewriter Museum, org that documents the mechanical lineage of every American typewriter brand from Remington to Smith Corona. Copiers do not inspire the same collector devotion that typewriters do. They are larger, heavier, more mechanically complex, and dependent on consumable systems, liquid toner carrier fluid, drum units, fuser assemblies, that are no longer manufactured. A Royal Quiet Deluxe portable typewriter can be restored with a new ribbon and a bottle of platinum conditioner. A Savin 750 requires parts and fluids that exist, if they exist at all, in the inventory of a retired technician who kept his service stock when the dealership closed. What the collector community preserves instead is the paper record. The Savin sales catalogs from the 1970s, those thick, glossy booklets with photographs of the machines in idealized American office settings. A woman in a pantsuit running copies while a suited man reviews a document in the background, appear on eBay with some regularity, priced between $8 and $30. The dealer training manuals, the service bulletins, the installation guides that Savin's national organization produced and distributed to its 450 dealerships through the 1970s and 1980s are archived in fragments at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware, which holds the business records of dozens of American office equipment companies whose corporate archives survived their companies. The Baker Library at Harvard Business School holds trade press coverage of the Copier Wars of the 1970s in its business history collection, issues of Office Products Dealer Magazine and Administrative Management that reviewed the Savin 750 against the Xerox 4000 and the IBM Copier 2 in language that reads 50 years later, like the record of a war most Americans never knew was being fought. The professional categories that Savin sustained vanished with the brand. The independent office equipment dealer, not the Staples end cap, not the Ricoh corporate account manager, but the owner-operator who knew every copy room in his territory by name, was already a diminishing species by the time Ricoh completed its acquisition. The Savin service technician, trained specifically on liquid toner systems and the mechanical architecture of the 750, 770, and 880 series, had no professional future in a market moving to dry toner and laser printing. His certification covered machines that were no longer being sold. His expertise covered a process that was no longer being used. He did not retire from the profession retired around him. The surprise footnote belongs to the technology itself. Savin's liquid toner process, the wet suspension system that Ricoh developed and Savin distributed across the American market for 20 years. is recognized by printing industry historians as a direct conceptual predecessor to the liquid electrophotography process that Hewlett-Packard commercialized in its Indigo digital press line beginning in the 1990s. The wet toner principle that American office managers chose in 1974 because it was cheaper than Xerox became, in refined and digitally controlled form, the basis of the high-end commercial printing technology that produces the pharmaceutical packaging inserts, the annual reports, and the short-run marketing materials that American companies print today. The machine that the Chicago insurance manager bought for $3,200 in 1977 was not simply a cheaper copier. It was, in its mechanical DNA, an early ancestor of a printing process still in active commercial use. The Olivetti Underwood thread that runs through this series belongs here as well. In 1959, the same year Savin was founded in New York, the same year Xerox introduced the 914, the same year the American office equipment industry was reorganizing around technologies none of its incumbents fully controlled. The Underwood Corporation was acquired by Olivetti of Italy, an American brand built on American manufacturing, absorbed by a foreign company that had decided the American market was worth owning directly, rather than through a distribution partner. Savin's story, 36 years later, is the same story told from the other direction. A foreign manufacturer that had used an American distribution partner to enter the American market, then decided the American market was worth owning directly. The mechanism was different. The logic was identical. The American name was what was lost in both cases. In a storage room in the basement of a county government building in central Ohio, there is a Savin 880 copier that was last serviced in 1993. The drum unit is worn, the liquid toner reservoir is dry, the copy counter reads 847 thous tau 11. The dealer sticker on the inside of the front panel gives a phone number with a 614 area code. The number has been disconnected for 20 years. The machine has not been moved because no one has decided what to do with it, and no one who currently works in the building remembers what it was called or who sold it or why it mattered. It mattered because it worked, every morning, every afternoon, for the better part of a decade, in a county government office, processing the documents of ordinary American administrative life, one copy at a time. The name on the front panel said Savin. That was enough. Every week on this channel, we return to the offices, the factories, and the showrooms where American business machines were built, sold, and eventually lost. If this history matters to you, the machines, the dealers, the companies that ran the American office for a century and then disappeared, subscribe and stay with us. The next empire is already waiting.